Project management on the surface seems so simple, common sense, but it's very easy for a project to get out of control. By following these secret steps, it'll help you keep your project under control, on budget, on schedule. Do you know that when your project is 20% complete, by that time it's almost too late to get your project back under control? By that time, if your project is behind schedule, over budget, it's pretty much where your project is going to stay through the end of the project. Therefore, it's critical to keep your project under control from start to finish. It's very important to understand all of your stakeholders and the best way to communicate with them. Let's face it, only in a perfect world can you complete a project without change. Every project has risks. The sooner you identify it, the better chance you have of managing it. Critical path methods helps you know what activities need to be completed on time to keep your project on time. The more team buy-in you can foster, the better your team will perform. Using project management helps customer relations by having a one contact point for the customer. Triple constraints helps you understand how scope, time, cost, and quality have a direct effect on each other. Just remember, your project team can make or break you. That is why it's so important to pick the right people for your team. People will recommend the quality of your project or service long after project completion. So just remember that. People will remember what your quality is of that product long after it completes. And they'll remember if you dealt with them fairly or not. Make sure you have a clear communication plan that all stakeholders can understand. It gives them the information they require for the project. Because you don't want to be one of those statistics of the 80 to 90% of projects that have failed due to problems with communication. You do not want to be another statistics of a failed project because of problems with communication or not enough communication. Make sure that your stakeholders get the information that they need to succeed and understand where you are in your project. Make sure you have a clear direction on communication to all your stakeholders. What is expected of them to make your project a success? And part of this will be your risk register, your stakeholder register, in order to have all that information available to you as a project manager to see where your stakeholders stand. Some of the key things that you want to make sure that you put in your project stakeholder register are, of course, like their names and titles, their contact information, what major requirements they're responsible, what their expectations are, what influence they have on the project or not, what is their role in the project, what is their responsibility for the project. And something that you don't always think of, are they actually for your project or are they against your project? Because, there can be some stakeholders are negative and do not want your project to succeed. As a project manager, you need to know that. And what is their actual informal role on the project within that? How can they affect you? Just because they do not have a formal title within the project management organization doesn't mean that they can't help or hinder you on the project. So it's just very important to know who the stakeholders are and how to best communicate with them. Now, the first thing to having a good change control system is to make sure you baseline your project plan. So before you can move from your planning process to your executing process, you need to baseline your project management plan. That way you have something to match your actuals to see if you're keeping your project on schedule, on budget. If you're making sure that you do not have any scope creep on your project. It's very important to have that in place in order to control your scope, schedule, cost, and risk on your project. This is just an example of within your change control system, some of the documents that your change control will actually help you keep control of. Let's face it, in life, change is going to be there. You just can't get away from it. Maybe in a perfect world, your project would be perfect, you wouldn't have any change. But in the real world, there's going to be change. Like on maybe a construction project, someone comes in and looks at the layout to the room and says, I really don't like where that wall is. Can you move that? Well, there you have yourself a scope change, which is going to cost some extra money, some extra time in order to make that change. Maybe there's even some structural risk that you have to take into consideration. This is an example of a change request form because every change on your project needs to be recorded. In a lot of cases, this will be connected to like a database which tracks all of your changes when they've been approved or maybe they've been rejected, how much time and money each change is going to cost. It's very important to have that open communications with your customer so they understand what these possible changes are and they can approve or reject them. And the next thing that you need to look at is planning versus executing on your project. Now, as I see it on most projects that I've helped manage, there are two major problems that projects face or project managers face. And the first one is the project manager, the team, they spend a lot of time in the planning process, putting together a really thorough project management plan. They make it really perfect. They spend maybe more time than they should have spent. But then they just put it on their shelf and they just don't do anything with it for the rest of the project. It just collects dust or it, hides away in that computer system someplace. And then when they come to the end of the project, it usually ends up being an overrun in budget, overrun in cost, maybe a never-ending project because no one is actually baseline that project plan and is not using it to compare actuals to it. So that's the first one. Now the second one is where the project manager and the stakeholders, they get together and they say, we understand what the requirements are for this. We do not need to take that time to document all these requirements and the scope of work and our specifications. Let's just jump right in there and start doing it. We don't have the time or money to spend all this worthless time on doing the planning. So they jump in there and they start working on it and then they start getting to test and they start testing it because your testing actually matches against your requirements. Well, you have no requirements. So they send in these stakeholders who said, yeah, we know what the requirements is. And each one of those is going to run through the testing. They're going to write up all these problems. They're going to fix them. And a lot of times, instead of the same person going back in, it'll be a different person. They'll come up with a whole new set of problems that they found. And there you have your never-ending project. And in a lot of cases, when we go into those, we find out that we have to go back to the beginning to define all the requirements before we can move to completion of the project. So that's why it's very important to take that on average, a rule of thumb, about 20% of your project costs and time should be spent on documenting your scope, requirements, baseline your schedule, baseline your budget for your project. There's some of the changes, the things that you want to use for your change control system. Of course, it helps you control that scope creep because they'll say, oh, that's just a little change. Why can't you do that? Well, a little change can be added up into a whole lot of changes, which can be a lot of money and time. So this actually records all those, analyzes the changes, allows the customer to make this decision, do we want to accept these changes or not, and solves any possible disputes on your project. The changes to your project. You want to keep a close eye on that scope, on your budget, risk of your project. Look for the signs to say, oh, this risk is maybe about to happen, and just keep in mind that resources are people, materials, equipment, all are part of the resources. So it's important to identify all those on your project. Some of your changes to your documentation, it can be for debugging, like bugs that you find in your software program. You use your change control system for that. Any systems maintenance, like maybe, oh, we need to upgrade the air conditioning system on the building. That can be part of your change control system. Coordination of any changes on your project, and possibly evaluation too of that product or service can also be used to control it. Now this is on the change control process. If we look at this, the first thing is a request for that change is going to come in. It's going to go to the project management office. Then they're going to evaluate that request. Do we have the money or the time? Does the customer want to spend that? If they say yes, they move on. If no, then it rejects and they log it and file it. If they say yes, then they're going to go through, the approval, do a little bit more research on it, define what the scope change would be. It's probably going to be a modification to your work breakdown structure. You may have to add more resources to it, maybe increase your budget, rewrite some of the requirements. You're going to do some type of a probability analysis. Is it really worth doing the change? Define possible new risks that could happen because of implementing this change, and that could be from whatever risks that you identify. You could say, no, we're rejecting that, we're going to log it. But if you're going to continue on, then you're going to actually modify your work breakdown structure, make changes to your scope, and then it goes through another approval. And if they approve it, then you're going to modify your scope plan. You're going to assign your team members. You're going to determine if it's an internal or external task. And you're going to do all the planning. Once it's complete, then you're going to do some type of design review, approve the design, and then incorporate the change into your project. Now for your scope management cycle, is just you realize the scope management plan is part of your project management plan. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to baseline it and then monitor and control it, analyze any changes. If there's updates to it, then you're going to update your project management plan.